Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Get ready for truth bombs, belly laughs, and the kind of accent that turns car into a two-syllable adventure. Here's your host, Sean.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to the Edge of Liberty right here on the SHI Media Network. It is the 21st of January, 2026. Got so much to talk about tonight. I do have a guest, a little bit of a Minnesota insider. So she will be under the guise of anonymity and needs to be. But we're going to get a lot of information. Maybe information you didn't hear before, you didn't know before. Goes back into the history of the governance of Minnesota and the state itself. And it's all very pertinent in what we're seeing out of Minnesota today. And I will say, before you're like, well, Sean, it's just somebody that he had on that he put a mask in front of and is having her say all these things. No, I don't have that sort of pull. If you disagree or doubt, you write the information down that you're going to receive tonight and you can go do the research yourself. Comes back to like that source document reading. You can figure it out. So tonight we're going to talk about Minnesota. We're going to talk about Davos and Gavin and Trump, and we're going to talk about a couple other things, some Supreme Court rulings if we get to it. It's just dangling there at the end. But, you know, as always with the Edge of Liberty, we will talk about what's important and what carries, and then we'll go from there. Look, if you're new to the channel, thank you so much for being here. Please like and subscribe to the network. Appreciate it. And I will pop in Goldie right now. Goldie, good evening. Thank you so much for being here.
Good evening. You can hear me?
I can hear you just fine. You're live. You're doing great.
All I had to do was say hello so far.
Well, and you nailed it. So we're going to go to your home state, and this is something that you and I have talked a lot off air. And one of the things that you bring up a lot is there's so much more that people don't hear about as far as everything that goes on in Minnesota, and certainly everything that we're seeing in the news today. And I asked a question Monday night. You and I discussed this too a little bit. You know, why Minnesota? And it's a broad brush question, and there's not going to be any one answer, and I know that. But it's just, how come everything came to a head seemingly in Minnesota? With the immigration aspect, it could have been anywhere in the country where there was a large population of illegal immigrants. You know, we kind of get why the fraud happened in Minnesota in the sense of you have a large community that's very communicative with each other. Once somebody figures out how to game the system, it trails like wildfire. And so that part's not going to be answered, but why it wasn't covered and why it wasn't necessarily outed nationally sooner, and a couple other things. So thank you for being here. I appreciate your time. I'm glad to have you back. I don't even know where to start with this because I have so many questions I want to ask you about all of this, but the first one I want to go with is kind of the broad brushstroke. Why do you think this all bubbled in the cauldron of Minnesota and came to a head? And you don't have to be specific, but just the political climate is kind of what I'm looking for.
Oh, easy questions first.
I figured I'd get right to it. You know what I mean?
I was trying to divine where you were going with this, and thank you so much for having me on. I've been listening to you and BZ, and probably a shameless plug for any of your curious listeners, is we had met at a Freedom Fest
Yeah.
out in Vegas about a dozen years ago. It's hard to believe it's been that long. And they're going to be back there again this July, as they usually do. Hope you guys, anybody listening, will attend Freedom Fest, the largest gathering of free minds. But in your question, one of the things that you wrapped into your very encompassing question was, why wasn't any of this fraud covered? And I think I heard you say this in one of your broadcasts over the last week or two, and maybe that's what started this interaction. People have been talking about this in Minnesota for the better part of at least 8 years, if not more. Even a major, again, we are drawing distinctions between mainstream media and independent media, but even a mainstream media outlet in the Twin Cities in 2018 broke a story about millions of dollars who were stolen from child care assistance programs. And at that time, I think there were regulations in place about money transfers, like the remittances, that money could flow out of the country. And so the only way that they could then get funds back to their families in Africa was to fly suitcases of cash out of the airport. And that was probably what really brought, the situation to the attention of the media, was these suitcases of cash flying out of the airports of Minneapolis. And so that was 2018. And then it continued again in 2019. There were overpayments to some of the, my people, the native tribes here in Minnesota, for some opioid treatments. And so it seems like there may have been a way to find their way in on fraud, but then it really was COVID-19 restrictions, lockdowns, and waivers that really broke everything open.
So you brought us, you laid out a whole bunch of stuff. So in 2018, you saw there was the fraud where money was being stolen, and that was something you would say that local media and politicians kind of knew was going on, and that was something that it just did not get the effect that it would have perhaps somewhere else. Yes,
it was met with a certain amount of outrage at the time, locally, as people were like, why are you stealing this money? But at that time, it was $72 million that was alleged to have been defrauded from these child care assistance programs. So fast forward, 5 or 6 years into the Feeding Our Future, where you did have the Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney for Minnesota was just like, oh, this is so bad. We have to pay attention to this. And it was 10 times as much. It was over $750 million that they have found it was this Feeding Our Future scandal. And it was supposed to be meal programs that went to elderly and kids during COVID. And that is, I think, was a little bit of the regulators' nose under the tent, that then went on to find all kinds of problems with housing programs, autism, and even daycare centers here in Minnesota. And that's what really blew up. The daycare centers is what blew up virally from that Nick Shirley video a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and we've talked about the fraud with the food program from COVID. We've talked about it in this network plenty of times because it was incredible. You look at 720 million, and I hate to say, if it was just $1 million or $2 million, but the reality is, if it was just $1 million or $2 million, people probably would not have. It wouldn't have been as much of a concern or an outrage, especially when you look at that case. And I've looked at part of that case, and you could see how easily the the structure of that fraud is most likely, and I don't know because I haven't seen the documentation, but is most likely the same sort of structure that we see in the daycare fraud today. Maybe some different players, maybe some different caveats, but in general, it seems like somebody looked at that case and went, "Oh, well, if they can do that from the getting money from the government, we can apply it to this program and then just do it as much as humanly possible."
Well, I do have a few numbers in front of me, courtesy of there's a legislative auditor in Minnesota. It is a truly independent branch appointed under the legislature, bicameral, bipartisan, and we don't have a whole lot of trust in government anymore, I would say. But from this agency, I think that their terms are spaced very outside of elections, and so they fiercely guard their nonpartisanship. And they did an audit of the whole Feeding Our Future and what led up to it. And granted, even when people raised concerns, the Feeding Our Future agency would threaten the Minnesota Department of Education, because these funds, that's how the federal funds that came to the state were funneled through the Department of Education, probably because it was like school meals, and that's just was that pipeline. And there were 2 times where they were like, "Hey, something doesn't look right," and they said, "Well, then we will sue you." They threatened legal action twice in 2020 when like major red flags were raised on these programs, and so then they stood down. So they were probably afraid of being called racist, or starving children, anything that they could do in more of a public media standpoint. But at the end of the day, between 2020, the payments for these food sites, and again, this is COVID, we got to kind of like put our minds into what 2020, it was totally a crazy time, but there were $70 million in payments because there were waivers that you could still feed people even if everything was like locked down. You could put the meals into a bag, they could pick up like takeaway. But then in 2021, that number jumped again from $70 million in 2020, it jumped to $336 million in 2021. So even if you looked at your utility bills from one month to another, you're like, "Oh my gosh, I know it was cold and it was $70 this month for my gas bill. It's $336 next month." Like, you would probably be like, "What?"
Yeah, there may be something to look at, a window open in the attic, something.
Yeah, maybe. And my kids leaving the door open. They were born in a barn. We get this, but no, apparently nobody really took a very hard look at this. And that's where it seemed like there was just a culture of fraud built into this, is we can't question this, whether it's they're going to sue us, or I know there are a lot of people here in the state who are saying that that money then came back to elected officials, and it's really just been very bonkers. And for those of us who work hard every day, we pay our taxes and think like we were working all this time, but we could have been opening up a daycare, or
I mean,
and something that we could have been getting on this grift.
If I'm going to be doing paperwork, I might as well do paperwork and not do any work next to it, and then make a ton more money than I am working my real job every single day. And I asked you that question, and I knew, obviously, because we talked beforehand, we're looking back at least 8 years. There was a huge fraudulent activity going on that people were aware of, most likely, in the state of Minnesota, that we could surmise, and I don't know for sure, and I'll admit that, but surmise that the daycare fraud probably stemmed from the framework of that. But I asked you that question and got that information because I wanted to show people that there are things that have been going on in Minnesota for a long time that plenty of people were looking the other way on. Like you just laid out clearly, that case should have garnered a lot of attention a lot sooner, and either intentionally or by being completely inept, it did not. So if you could explain a little bit about the state government of Minnesota in that regard, and just how, I don't want to say dirty, but dirty it can be.
Well, it definitely goes back a ways. I can't remember the last time that we had a Republican governor, because even that, when we look at the federal level, like right now, we have a sort of a more conservative or a constitutional majority on the Supreme Court because of retirements, and like Donald Trump, Bush before him, what they were able to appoint, because we've had such a Democrat leading majority in our governorship, and also it's flipped back and forth some of the, whether it's the Senate or the House, but Democrats pretty much run the state, and then it just becomes kind of this self-feeding, is even if you happen to lose an election, the Democrats are in charge, then we'll just find a commission and park you there, get a salary for the 2 years later when you can run again. I mean, we had our state auditor and the leader of the Minnesota Senate, state auditor Julie Blaha, and then the Senate leader was like Melendez, and they were in a rollover accident, a vehicle rollover accident with an open container of alcohol. And it was not news until 9 months later. So the media is in their pocket, they're able, the unions totally go to bat. It is a state that it's not just political. There are multi ways that they protect their power here in the state. So yeah, you're going to have a few, agencies that maybe are not doing things right, but they put the money back to the side of your friends. You're not going to be that curious about it.
Well, and it's the fox in the hen house, so to speak, right? I mean, like you said, you had a state auditor who was in a rollover accident with an open container in the vehicle, and the citizenry of that state did not hear about that for almost 9 months. And that brings us to, okay, we know internally it's all Democrat run, and I'm going somewhere with all of this, so it's all Democrat run. The fox is guarding the hen house. We're now seeing cases where the media is not reporting things such as a rollover for a state auditor, which even in some pretty liberal areas, you would see that be reported from at least local news to find out, or to tell the local population. You're seeing, like you said, the food fraud, so to speak, feeding our future. That's out of control. So you're already starting to set the groundwork for a government that is doing what it kind of wants to, hiding things when it has to. And now you brought up the media. How complicit is the media in the Twin Cities area?
I mean, I don't know about complicity, but yeah, maybe they're definitely uncurious. I will give a shout out to the only reason we even have these stories, like the 2018, the reports of the cash, being on planes going, out of the Minneapolis airport, and then there was also in 2019 there were overpayments to Medicaid. So we have had a few outlets who have tried to, draw attention to the fraud stories, but I do think it has been more the breakthrough of independent media. I'll give shout outs here in Minnesota. One of them, even it's left of center, but you can still get to the truth from the left. There's the Reformer. There's from the right, there's Alpha News here in Minnesota, and even just like the Nick Shirley Who knows why he was here or whatever his motivation was, but just like going to daycare centers and say, are there any children here? Seems pretty basic.
Yeah, it's like going to an aquarium and asking to see, fish. Usually there are fish inside when you ask that question, and they don't yell at you for daring to come to an aquarium and looking for fish. And the reason I'm asking all these questions, and we'll go to the bottom of the hour if that's okay with you. The reason I'm asking all of these questions is when you frame just these few instances against what we're seeing today on a national level, finally, because like you said, clearly, I mean, you knew stuff was going on. A lot of people knew stuff was going on. Maybe outside the Twin Cities area, it was harder to come by that information because now you have a media who's not following with the stories, minus a few, like you said, the Reformer and Alpha News. You have this almost perfect storm of a state where they have control. They control the communications and what's being sent out. They are looking the other way when it's politically convenient for them. And the Keith Ellison phone call a couple weeks ago being leaked kind of shores that up, where he says, I'll make sure that none of this fraud stuff gets close to you. And then the next day he gets a whole bunch of donations. Do you think that's enough for people to understand how we got to today in Minnesota? You have your governor who is, he's your governor. You have this fraud case that's blown up. You now have the ICE raids that are going on, and the amount of people that are showing up to violently protest and intervene. Does it feel like you could have seen this perfect storm coming 2 years ago, or even a year ago when Walz was running for VP?
I think we saw the storm 6 years ago in the wake of what happened to George Floyd, where people were mad, people were upset. I was upset, and again, before all the facts came out, is like you have this interaction between law enforcement, and a man. Definitely the other side tried to make it racial. But yeah, if you have somebody who is in police custody and it doesn't go well, like nobody's happy about that situation. But I think what ensued over the next 3 to 4 days, where it started very peacefully, where we're like, oh, we're mad and we don't know what happened. But then you had, the Molotov cocktails, and, you had no-go zones, and the confrontations with law enforcement, to the fact that it escalated, all of the rioting, blocks burned down, even the police of Minneapolis gave up on the 3rd precinct building and allowed, the protesters, which at that point you're not protesters, you're rioters, to come in and to take that over. I think 6 years ago was this license of there are no consequences.
Right.
And I'm definitely not discouraging or disrespecting the First Amendment, but it's supposed to be peaceful. And if you're talking about fire and you're talking about people getting hurt, it's not peaceful anymore. Peaceful. But well, I think it doesn't even go back to this fraud or any of the recent events. Like that precedent was set in 2020.
Well, and you go back to that time, and especially with the George Floyd, the riots, and there's a reason why the entire world calls them the George Floyd riots. And you said, I don't want to trample on the First Amendment and you're not. So when protests no longer start being violent and start being destructive, they are no longer protests under the law, right? Peacefully assemble is a key point. That's something that gets missed, and I think a lot of that goes back to civics. It's like the people say, oh, I have free speech, I can say whatever I want to X, Y, and Z. It's like, no, you can't. Freedom of speech has to do with speaking out against the government. It doesn't mean that you can walk up to somebody and yell a horrific word in their face, that because your constitutional rights only go as far until they impede on somebody else's, is really the general rule of thumb. So as we get to today, and you've been watching this closely for a long time, you now have Keith Ellison, Frey, Walz, and a few others who are getting subpoenaed. They're obviously their encouragement of some of this behavior is certainly questionable, and that's being very, very nice. Do you feel that there's any sort of change, and you're close to it all? Do you feel that there's any sort of change in the state government where they're like, oh, maybe we should start changing gears a little bit, or maybe we should pick a new direction, maybe we should not encourage this as much?
Oh my goodness, you're funny.
Look, I'm asking the questions. You're the one with the information.
I thought it was just your speech and how you say car.
Car. And I'm saying
no.
it nicely because I'm not just ranting like I normally do. Car.
No, it's we definitely, you can just look at an electoral map of Minnesota and you see like most of the state is red, votes red. Few like metro centers still vote blue, but that is what really rubs us the wrong way in greater Minnesota, and that's what we call ourselves outside of the metro, is we are very dominated. It's the reason why I think that the foresight of our founding fathers to even have the electoral college at the federal level, we would love to have that at the state level, is we are dominated by the population center of the Twin Cities. Don't get their hands dirty. Don't know that you need to get up at 4:30 in the morning to milk cows. During COVID, it was really, really stressful for us when, you know, because the chickens don't know about COVID and everybody's shutting down and staying at home, you know, and hunkering in place. As they're still laying the eggs, the piggies are getting fatter, the cows are giving milk. We have to get up every single day, even though, you know, when COVID broke, it was still February, March, is you have to take care of these farm duties. And then when, I don't know if it was medically indicated or even like a COVID thing, when they shut down the processing plants. And now you have invested 6, 8, 12 months into these livestock to bring them to market, and you can't process them. It was so stressful to so many of our communities that they just had to cull herds or cull flocks because they couldn't sell them, they couldn't process them. Nobody in the Twin Cities of Minnesota understands work
or cares
to a certain extent. They're like, oh, my meat comes from styrofoam, although they probably are all vegans and they don't wear leather either. You know, don't drink milk, it's oat milk and can't milk an almond.
Animals, go buy them at the grocery store like other people.
Yeah, so we definitely do not have a legislature in Minnesota that is going to change. The only thing that can change the direction of the state is going to be elections. Or, I mean, at least we should have a quiet few days because as I'm looking at the weather forecast, is we have very, very strong northwest winds moving in here. And I think the high temperature is not going to get above 0 for the next 2 or 3 days. So, I mean, we call it like Friday. Everybody else would probably be really offended by it, but that I think the weather is probably going to quiet things down here for the next few days.
Well, and plus a lot of the people who are bussed in from maybe warmer areas won't be prepared and able to deal with it. We got, 2 minutes left. And I want to ask about Walz, and I saved him for last because I mentioned him earlier, but when he got picked as Harris's running mate, was there a giant collective head slap from greater Minnesota?
Oh, absolutely.
You mean he's not a man of the people like he portrayed himself as? I mean, he pretty much told us he was a farmer who worked with his hands all day.
Well, I mean, and that wasn't even true because, you know, trying to have a little bit of respect, you know, he was in the National Guard for 24 years. And he was an educator. He didn't get a whole lot of dirt probably under his nails. So he was not really a working man. he was in the union. Yes, he was in the service, but even then he was not really honest about how he, left the service, calling himself a command sergeant major, even though he said that he had achieved the rank, but he couldn't retire with it. So I don't know. You can trust anything that he says.
Well, I wish the people of greater Minnesota well. I hope this comes to a clearing soon, because I know it's been difficult. We've talked about this before, how it's affecting the state by and large. I do want, as stories pop up from the Minnesota, and it's going to be in the news for a while, even with the fraud cases haven't even started yet. So it's unfortunately just getting underway. Will you come back and visit us and give us updates, please?
If it works out, that's fine. I see a couple of things in this. This is very new to me, but like a news station or newspaper for story sources, if you want to follow up with any of these folks, I'm happy to send it on. But at the end of the day, we really just need, elections have consequences. We're going to do what we can here in Minnesota to change our direction, but nationally, we saw what happened in 2018. The Democrats had a huge wave. They took over the House. They completely stopped, Trump, and went into, endless impeachment and investigations. And I think that we need to let the small differences go to the side, because we already knows what happens if we want to try to make the small differences big between us. So I appreciate you giving me some time and insight on Minnesota. And next time, maybe we can compare hot dish recipes.
I'm down for that. I love to cook. Thank you so much, Goldie. I appreciate you being here, and we'll touch base soon.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to River of Common Sense, where we cut through the noise of news and politics with a sharp wit and clear discussion. Tune in every Monday and Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for a refreshing dose of reality as we fearlessly tackle the tough topics with no nonsense, just pure common sense. Visit shrmedia.com to discover where you can catch River of Common Sense in action. He's here to amplify your inner logic. He may not always be polite, he may not always be refined, but one thing's for sure, he always tells it like it is.
Come listen to BZ's Berserk Bobcat Saloon Radio Show. Live on select and exclusive Tuesday and Thursday nights at 11 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Pacific on the SHR Media Rumble channel, SHR Media YouTube channel, X, Twitch, Spreaker, and wherever great conservative podcasts are found. BZ, your conservative Sherpa, guides you through the maelstrom of Democrat, leftist, and globalist lies, chaos, deceit, and betrayal. Raised as a free-range child with dirt, stains, mud, and freedom, BZ broadcasts from North Idaho, comfortably surrounded by actual normal people. Jump into our plush, sumptuous, palatial, and resplendent chat room on rumble.com. Click on live chat to join. Now, with 37% more umbrage and 19% more bulbosity than previous shows, featuring delicious Liberty additives for the best in late-night conservatarian talk radio. BZ reminds you that with great beard comes great responsibility. No chinchillas were harmed, embarrassed, fat-shamed, or the focus of any sarcasm whatsoever in the making of this ad.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Edge of Liberty right here on the SHI Media Network. Thank you to our friends over at KLRN for the simulcast. Thank you to the moderators keeping the chat room in check. We greatly appreciate it. And of course, thank you to Goldie for joining us. There's a lot more information there that we will get out in another episode. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, even if you don't like us. That's okay. You can subscribe and then get notified to come back and, argue with us. Love good, healthy debate. That's what makes this country great. I don't have to agree with you, but I can respect you. But you can also have a little fun. So the World Economic Forum is happening this week. And man, this was just, I thought after Klaus died that you wouldn't hear about WEF all that often. I mean, it would still be a thing. The Democrats will get money. The Green people will get money. We all know how it works, yada, yada, yada. But then you find out that Newsom, who's supposed to be 3 miles from where I am, jumps on a plane on taxpayers' dollars, and he's all of a sudden in Davos, which is weird because he's not a world leader. And we couldn't figure out why, for the life of us, he would suddenly go over to Davos. And then, well, we saw it. Wait, that wasn't. No, I'm sorry. I got the wrong one. That was it. He actually was there and he did a photo op with Alex Soros, of all people. Now, we know that Gavin, he's got a little bit of an ego, which is why he would put a taxpayer bust of himself in the San Francisco City Hall. I mean, and we all know he's running. I mean, that's easy to figure out, right? And I don't care you don't have to see what the betting websites are saying as to whether or not he will run. He's gonna run like that. That's it. Now, the problem is, and I've said this before for Gavin, he's going to get the automatic, Democrat vote, right? There, because the Democrats, for the most part, there's that 35% that it doesn't matter whose name is next to the D, as long as it has the D, he's going to go. And so,
I think
it started pretty quickly as far as when the American delegation, if you will, got over there, because Scott Bessent had some few words for Gavin Newsom.
very, very ironic that Governor Newsom, who strikes me as Patrick Bateman meets Sparkle Beach Ken, may be the only Californian who knows less about economics than Kamala Harris.
So he started off a little spicy. By the way, to Newsom's credit, he released on his little website there, the money-making website, the fundraising website that he has, the Sparkle Ken doll of himself. And I laughed because I'm like, yeah, all right, I'll give that to you. You played that one well. But when Newsom was over there, he was giving, and I got the interview here, he was giving very bizarre interviews. And when I say bizarre, just ones like this that, you're calling out a lot of people pretty quick, man.
Messages from the White House around Greenland this week.
Yeah, it's time to buck up. It's time to get serious and stop being complicit. It's time to stand tall and firm, have a backbone. I've seen this in the United States, the supine Congress playing both sides, saying one thing on a text or a tweet and another publicly.
It's time to have principles.
It's time to stand tall and strong.
Does that mean responding with tariffs?
It's time to stand united. You make that determination. I don't make that determination.
But when you say standing tall, what do you mean?
Just, I can't take this complicity. People rolling over. I should have brought a bunch of knee pads for all the world leaders.
So this is the same guy who, if he got into office, would be kissing all of the world's leaders' asses and trying to send things back to the way of Biden and Obama. We're a world government. We need each other and no borders and blah, 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 blah. This is all the shit that Newsom believes, and we know that. And he's saying, oh, yeah, all you guys. And I'll be clear. He just wants to be able to play these clips when he starts running his ads. Okay, that's all this is about. He absolutely just wants to be able to say, look, I went over to WEF and I told them that they're all wearing knee pads, so I'm really tough with the world. But you're not, Gavin, and everybody knows you're not. And as I've said before with Newsom, his whole approach to running in this next election is to try to make people forget what a disaster it is here in California, where I live. I watch him every day. I know what a disaster it is. I know all the money that we've spent. I know what a just entire disaster is. And then, like you said, the picture eventually with Alex Soros came out. So now we see the connection. There's the Soros connection that we all knew was there. But instead, he went out. it shows you how cocky and stupid Gavin Newsom is, because if I was Gavin Newsom, with everything that's been said about the Soros family, I would take their money and tell them on the side, look, we really can't be seen together right now. Give it a couple years. But he didn't. He took the picture, and obviously I showed the funny picture earlier just because it made me laugh, and that's it. But you go over and you look at so many of the other statements that were made by world leaders, and either slamming the Biden administration, as we see here. Oh, stand by. My apologies. Click the wrong damn button. Where is it? You know, you make one little misclick and it screws everything else up. I'll get to it, folks. Let's see. I completely backed out of all my clips. I apologize. It does happen. Oh, here we go. You see world leaders, as much as Newsom's over there shitting on Trump, you see world leaders who are actually saying, you know, maybe Trump has done some good things from even our perspective, like this.
Question to the audience. I mean, many of you, I know, criticize Donald Trump. But do you really think that without Donald Trump, 8 big economies in Europe, including Spain and Italy and Belgium, Canada, by the way, also outside Europe, would have come to 2% in 2025 when they were only on 1.5% at the beginning of the year? No way. Without Donald Trump, this would never have happened. They're all on 2% now. Do you really think that in the summit in The Hague, as already Alex was saying, sorry, the president of Finland was saying, that, and here...
Yeah, so what he was saying is, hey, Trump got the EU, essentially, and Canada to come up to the level of funding they were supposed to be at. This is specific in NATO with their defense budgets. And that's something that we've been talking about on this network and in this country for a long time. We fucking fund NATO. At the end of the day, we fund the majority of NATO. And all we've asked time and again is, hey, do me a favor, all you other countries that we provide defense for, can you just, I don't know, act like you're fucking trying, right? And they finally did. And then Trump showed up, and Trump gets on stage, and he was very Trumpian as well. It's really funny to watch Gavin Newsom sit there and tear apart all the world leaders for not standing up to Trump, and then it sits there. You have Trump, who's now shitting on all the world leaders.
Governments very foolishly followed, turning their backs on everything that makes nations rich and powerful and strong. And there's so much potential in so many nations. The result was record budget and trade deficits and a growing sovereign deficit driven by the largest wave of mass migration in human history. We've never seen anything like it. Quite frankly, many parts of our world are being destroyed before our very eyes, and the leaders don't even understand what's happening. And the ones that do understand aren't doing anything about it. Virtually all of the so-called experts predicted my plans to end this failed model would trigger a global recession and runaway inflation. But we have proven them wrong. It's actually just the opposite.
And we talked about that too. The decisions, this world government idea where everybody just keeps opening the borders, letting everybody in, flooding the systems, flooding the healthcare systems, flooding all of the systems, if you will, is disastrous for nations. And that it's okay to close your doors. It's okay to kind of take count of what's going on in your nation right now and fixing it before you allow a lot of other people in. And look, we saw this coming years and years and years ago when all the migration started happening to Europe. I've said it. Other people on this network have said it. People much smarter than I have said it. That's not going to work out. That is not going to work out. You flood the system like that, and what you've already built is going to be absolutely destroyed. And we're seeing that in a lot of countries. Look at the UK. Look at France. Look at Brussels. I'll tell you right now, what you don't get over here in the US is you don't get a lot of European news. Start looking up European news. Seriously, start looking up European news, and you'll realize just how badly it isn't working out for them on that side of the pond. And then when it comes to Greenland, Trump spoke about Greenland as well.
You here? Yes, he's here. Hello, Mark. We never asked for anything, and we never got anything. We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that. Okay? Now everyone's saying, oh, good. That's probably the biggest statement I made, because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force. All the United States is asking for is a place called Greenland, where we already had it as a trustee, but respectfully returned it back to Denmark not long ago after we defeated the Germans, the Japanese, the Italians, and others in World War II. We gave it back to them. We were a powerful force then, but we are a much more powerful force now. After I rebuilt the military in my first term and continue to do so today, we have a budget of $1.5 trillion. We're bringing back battleships. The battleship is 100 times more powerful than the great battleships.
So what you saw right there is, Trump said we're not going to use force. And that is an indicator to me that on some level, a deal has already been done. And as we come to find out, we've already submitted a deal to Denmark to be able to do it without fully taking over Denmark, or there's a whole bunch of ins and outs of it. But, and he's right, Greenland was a trustee of the US at one point. And I think that deal, I legitimately think that's the whole reason that Trump went over to the World Economic Forum, was to cut that deal. And then you had world leaders over there. And, every world leader says something stupid at one time or another, but usually it's not contradicting themselves within 11 minutes.
Just as a direct answer to the question of this panel, can Europe defend itself? My answer is unequivocally yes.
Without the Americans?
Without the Americans. I mean,
how?
That's not true. I don't know who they're talking about defending themselves against. Look, outside of nukes, we all know Russia's a paper tiger. The Ukraine war has shown us that. The EU, outside of NATO, they could have probably have done so much more to stop that. We all know that. If China attacks them, yeah, China has a lot. If you look at a lot of experts, China has a lot of paper tiger military as well. I don't see China going to invade the EU all that often. Could the EU defend themselves against what we've seen in Russia now? Yeah, probably. Mostly they have some pretty, all joking aside, they just don't have the numbers. That's the thing that they're lacking, and they don't spend enough money into their defense. That's the thing that they're lacking. Capabilities, they get it all from the US. Yes, they make some of their jets on their own, and they make a lot of their equipment on their own, but there's also a ton of equipment that they use that they buy from the United States. But he said, yeah, you know what? Without hands down, the EU can defend itself. And then he continued, which was a really bad mistake for him.
Them for these key elements. You've said earlier that Europe can defend itself without the Americans. If it comes down...
not exact, Mike, so that's not a quote.
No, that's what he said, though.
More or less. We'll go back to the transcript.
Let's stick to the left on this one. Yeah.
So statements from me will not add anything here. And when it comes to the Arctic, I think President Trump is right. Other leaders in NATO are right. We need to defend the Arctic. We know that these sea lanes are opening up. We know that China and Russia are increasingly active in the Arctic. There are 8 countries bordering on the Arctic. 7 are a member of NATO. That's Finland and Sweden and Norway and Denmark, Iceland, Canada and the US. And there's only 1 country bordering on the Arctic outside NATO, and that's Russia. And I would argue there is a 9th country, which is China, which is increasingly active in the Arctic region. So President Trump and other leaders are right. We have to do more there. We have to protect the Arctic against Russian and Chinese influence. And that's exactly what NATO ambassadors decided to do in September. We are working on that, making sure that collectively will we defend the Arctic region. So,
yeah, Trump is right. And look, when you talk about defending the Arctic, that's where Greenland comes into play. That's where Greenland comes into play massively, because of time and distance and stepping off point. But it also comes into play with protecting the U.S. homeland. If you have a bunch of assets I have to focus on in Greenland, the homeland where the majority of our stuff is, can actually be protected and be utilized. So that was the World Economic Forum. I wanted to get to a little bit about Iran. The situation in Iran is just getting worse and worse and worse. The U.S. is moving ships into the region. I've had a couple people tell me that there's potentially something going on here shortly. Don't know, can't confirm. I just a couple of little snippets here and there. But doctors on the ground are calling it an utter slaughter right now in Iran. They describe mass shootings as systematic blinding of young people. So they're not even, they're blinding them to make them suffer for the rest of their life. This is absolutely what a horrible regime Iran is. And just keep an eye on that. We haven't talked about it a lot. We've had so much going on in the news with Greenland and Minnesota, as we talked about earlier, and all these other places. But Iran is a situation that is not done. There's no coverage on the protests. They're still going on, contrary to what a lot of people believe. And it's still something that we have to keep an eye on, because something's going to happen over there soon, is all I'm saying. A few other stories I wanted to clean up on. This was back, and this story didn't get a lot of traction, but do you remember the Seditious Six? Well, allegedly, Klobuchar is under investigation for that. And I wanted to talk about that earlier, and we don't have a lot of, but it just didn't get talked about. And yeah, that Seditious Six video is still coming back. What's his name there? Mark, not Giffords. That's his maiden name. His married name. He's still putting out videos every third day defending his actions, which is not a good sign of somebody who is in the right. And that's something that it'll be interesting to see how that folds out. I do want to play an old clip for you. And this is Bill Clinton. Oh no, I think I already played that the other night. I apologize. I had more from the WEF. Oh, this was another good. I might as well get into the memes for the night. This is another good meme that was put online. That's Newsom and Soros. And of course, Newsom has his racing clothes on, in which, has all of his payments coming in from. I thought that I got a kick out of that. I don't care what anyone says. That was fucking funny. Let's see. Oh, and I don't know if I saved him, but the vice president, or the second lady of the United States, Usha Vance, announced that they're pregnant. They're going to be having another baby in July, which I don't know if you recall the picture from Halloween of JD Vance dressing up as the meme of JD Vance and posting the TikTok of that, which was just really funny. Look, anyone that can actually make fun of themselves, I'm a fan of. And he's doing a pretty good job of that. But I do want to point out to everybody, that it was 9 months from Halloween will be in July when they're expected to have the kid. So did that video do a little something extra? I don't know. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. Another story that people probably weren't following. U.S. for the first time in 50 years experienced a net migration 2025. which is huge. It's enormous. And certainly one of the main reasons that fentanyl deaths are down. And the Atlantic wrote an article about this, but they couldn't put their finger on how it happened. How is it that we shut the border and we slow the amount of drugs coming into the country, and all of a sudden fentanyl deaths are down? It's almost like we've stemmed the flow of fentanyl by controlling our borders and dealing with the people that we're bringing it to the country. It's fucking amazing to me. When you take actions and that can be successful, and then they're successful, and then a paper like the Atlantic can go, we have no idea how that happened. It's absolutely bullshit, man. Look, over 100,000 people a year from fentanyl. 100,000. If narco terrorists or China or anybody else was shooting these people, there would be mass outrage on the street if the government did nothing about it. And that's what we saw under the Biden administration. The government did absolutely fucking nothing about it. They opened the borders. Special interest aliens, come on in. Potential terrorists, come on in. Drug flow like we've never seen, sure, come on in. And then suddenly you shut the border, and you don't have to. It was the same thing that Trump did in his administration the first time, right? And then Biden undid the day he got in, and then we realized the polls were terrible about the border. He added some of them back, and then Trump finished locking them up. And then all of a sudden, the border tightens up and the drug deaths go down. It's absolutely crazy. And what do I got? 4 minutes left. If you need a reason not to vote Democrats, I have at least two coming up in both the midterms and the general election. Here's the first one.
If you look at the budget actually we're working on right now, and we'll have the T-HUD budget, transportation and HUD budget, we restore most of the cuts and even go higher than previous years on many of the programs that DOJ slashed. When I met our nominee for HUD secretary, then he was nominee, he talked a nice game, but he doesn't seem to have the clout to make those views prevail over the DOJ people, over the cut people.
Yeah, so it's amazing how cutting, and this tells you just how bad Democrats are at even optics. Most people approved of the cuts, getting rid of the government fat. The amount of money that we were just sinking into the government was a good thing, and the amount of waste. And look, we talk about waste. You look at Minnesota, we look at a lot of other cases about how the money was just being handed out and nobody was paying attention. And that shores up why DOJ is important, and it should continue to be important. And the Democrats are out here saying, and look, I know Schumer is probably going to get taken out in the next election. They want his seat bad. They want Klobuchar to be the senior. The progressives are coming after him hardcore because he hasn't been hard enough, in their opinion, on Trump. And then you have, where's this wingnut? I have one more video. Hold on. I'll get to it. I know I'm running out of time. My finger's scrolling as fast as it can, for God's sakes. Oh, there's Chuck Schumer talking about how immigration was important back in 1990 something. I was going to show you that tonight. Oh no, but I can't without
Congress is going to.
I don't know if you know who this woman is. Her name's Jennifer Welch. She was an actress, I guess, on some level, and now she's a leftist podcaster. This is her talking. I'm not even going to say his name. He used to work for CNN, and everybody hated him, and he's a moron. And this is what they want to do. And this is when we have this conversation of how can we even converse when you want to burn everything down? This is the sort of rhetoric we're talking about.
The blue tsunami means that Congress is going to haul Elon Musk, big balls, and a bunch of other people's ass in front and say, what crimes did you commit? And it's going to get really serious. And the same with Trump, because I believe, and this is just my opinion, that Trump and all of the bottom-feeding morons surrounding him, and Elon Musk and all the bottom-feeding Klingeroners that surround him, I think they commit crimes every day. And I think to reconcile all of this is going to take hardcore, not integrity Democrats fuck you, Democrats. Fuck you for fucking over our country. We are serious about this. We are prosecuting. We're going to uncover every document, every phone call, everything you did. We will be relentless about it. And that's the mindset they've got to have, because I think the electorate is going from, we've got to get him out, but also we want accountability.
There has to be accountability. You have to have a situation where there's accountability. And I talked about this the other day with Fanone.
Of course, there's
MPD police officer who almost got killed on January 6th.
And you look at that, and how many people on the left agree with that, and it's absolutely insane. They just want to burn it all back down again because they need power and they need control, and that's the only way they're going to get it. And it's just one more reason why Democrats should never, ever, ever be in charge until they wake the fuck up. Folks, that's it for me on the Edge of Liberty right here on the SHR Media Network. Thank you so much to everybody who watched. Thank you to everybody who subscribed. If you haven't, now's your chance before we go off air. Thank you to the chatters. Thank you to the mods who are keeping the chatters in line. I greatly appreciate you. Please check out our website, shrmedia.com. There's a lot of written articles from me and other hosts. And if you have a chance, please check it out. And also, I'm not the only one on this network. Every Monday and Friday, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 on the East Coast, you have the River of Common Sense with Jersey Joe. Tuesday and Thursdays, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon on the East Coast. You have Mission Ready Man with my pal Big E. Tuesday and Thursday night, you have the bulbous one, the Berserk Bobcat Saloon with BZ, right here on the SHR Media Network. And also the Alien makes an occasional appearance over on our YouTube on Sundays when he gets around to it, when he zooms past the planet again. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you Monday. I hope you have a good rest of your week. Good night.